What's up, everybody? My name is Darius Brockett, and welcome to another episode of If I Were the Committee, starring yours truly in Darius Brockett himself. But on this edition of If I Were the Committee, I have on a great friend of mine, someone who I consider very knowledgeable when it comes to the college football playoffs, as someone, a colleague who I work with, but also a friend, and Anthony McBarnette, often called AMAC. And yes, I know I stumbled. It is late at the time of me recording this, America. So don't judge me on how I say names. It's late. You guys try to do a lot of stuff and get this done in all at a certain time crunch. It's called deadlines, people.
Yeah.
So, AMAC,
hmm
welcome to the show.
Yeah.
I would like to say thank you for being here. You was on season one last year for the very first episode. Now
Yeah.
we're in four episodes in, and it's year number two of the 12 team college football playoff committee. We were
Yeah.
so excited about it last year. What is your first initial thoughts with the new rankings that's out?
So first initial thoughts, you said it's year two. So we get straight seeding this year. So there's no Penn State path this year to the semifinals. I think that's a big thing. How that works out, how that plays out, I think is interesting. And then as we get to this week, the latest edition of the college football playoff, I think the thing that's most interesting is Miami. And I think Miami has been kind of like that that thread line, that through line throughout the whole college football playoff. I think when the rankings first came out, everyone was kind of looking at Notre Dame spot and Miami spot, and they're seven or eight spots apart. I think Notre Dame was about 11 or
Eight.
they were
It was
eight.
an 8 spot difference at the time from the
Yes.
first ever rankings earlier this
Yeah,
year.
yeah. And Miami had the head to head. And now we fast forward to this week and we see Miami sitting at 13 and Notre Dame sitting at 9. But the thing that's interesting for me right now with Miami is Miami being fifth in the ACC standings
Yeah, fifth.
and fifth in the ACC standings. So with 2 weeks to go, 2 games to go, they're basically out of the ACC championship. They're not going to find themselves in the college football playoff through an ACC bid. They would have to get an at-large bid, but we still see them at 13. To make the college football playoff, I think they need a lot of help, um, particularly outside of the conference. But I think it will be interesting if they find themselves in that coveted 10 spot, or if they can find themselves even at 11. How does that work out when it comes to how many ACC teams get into the college football playoff? And where does that other spot come from? Are we taking spots from the Big 12? Are we taking spots? And the Big 12 is also in a similar situation with you hope Texas Tech wins out and wins the conference championship.
Definitely.
It's interesting with those two conferences in particular, um, who wins those conferences and where the other team who doesn't win that conference, where they're ranked.
Yeah. I want to, so you kicked off with Miami. I do want to dive into the ACC since you started that. But for those who do not know what's going on or who was living under a rock, the rankings dropped Tuesday. No major changes in the top three. Alabama did lose and they fell out of the top five. But our 1 through 4 goes Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M. Georgia now moves up. Then we have Texas Tech at 5, Ole Miss 6, Oregon 7, Oklahoma 8, Notre Dame 9, Bama 10, BYU 11, 12 Utah, and then 13 will be Miami. If we look at the seedings, Miami only gets in on the technicality of being the highest ranked conference champion, even though, like you said earlier, is mathematically eliminated. You started off with Miami, and I want to stay within the SEC. Is there a path for the ACC to get multiple bids in? And I asked this question because last week when I was talking to Gorgie, we talked about the idea of two group of fives getting in over the ACC, and that was at the time when Virginia had to play Duke, and Duke, if they won, they would control their destiny and be the second team to be in that ACC. And if they were to win that championship, it'd be hard to put a four-loss Duke team in. Now with them losing to Virginia, Miami, like you said, is still no clear path for them to get in. But Georgia Tech is your second highest ranked group ACC, and then you have Virginia. How do you see the ACC, and is there a path for them to be a multi-bid league like these other conferences?
Yeah, I think that the best path is it's going to be a lot. Like I think there's going to have to be a lot that happens in front of the ACC teams, particularly Miami and Virginia. But I think that you're going to have a conference champion that doesn't beat Miami. So a conference championship that doesn't include Miami, and whoever wins that goes to the college football playoff. All right. And then some carnage to happen, maybe in the Big 12, maybe in the SEC, somebody just falling apart, Alabama taking another loss or Oklahoma taking another loss. Oregon, they have a big game versus USC coming up this week. If they lose that game, I think you're going to have multiple of these things happen for Miami to comfortably get into that top 10 because of the other ACC team and then the group of five team. You want to be in that top 10 of the college football playoff rankings and then have the other ACC champion who won the championship game to get into the college football playoff as well.
I agree. However, I do stand on this, and I've made the claim and notion every time when we talk about Miami. Although I'm a fan, I'm realistic. I
Mm-hmm.
still understand like there is a path for them, but should they be in? I don't know. The only reason why I argue that is them in Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Now that the committee has almost kind of made it known they are an eye test based committee this year,
Mm-hmm.
how do you see it shaking out? Do you believe the difference between Notre Dame and Miami are those four spots, or do you think it should be a little bit closer? Because you mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that if Notre Dame was at 14 and Miami was at 15, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But it's the fact that Notre Dame is sitting comfortably at 9 and Miami sitting at 13 right now. I think that
Common opponent will be Pitt.
mhm,
That is the key. Miami
mhm.
plays Pitt, Georgia Tech plays Pitt, and Notre Dame, we saw this past weekend, played Pitt.
How about the common opponent being Miami versus Notre Dame? But the reason I kind of put this behind me and I'm not standing on this so much, I feel like an old man yelling at the cloud. It's like Miami won the game. It's like they're clearly the better team. But, I understand the bad losses from Miami and Louisville and SMU. But, there are biases from other
Bad
conferences.
loss versus head to head win.
Exactly. And we see biases from other conferences where, you know, I'm looking at before Texas took this loss they took this loss this past weekend. They had a bad loss to Florida, but they found themselves able to play Georgia and possibly win against Georgia and find themselves comfortably in the playoff. I don't understand why teams like Miami aren't getting that same doubt, especially if you're putting Notre Dame at 9. Again, if Notre Dame was at 13, if they were out of the playoffs, I can understand Miami kind of being right there behind them or around Notre Dame at kind of outside of the playoff. But when you have a head to head, I think teams should be rewarded for those head to head matchups unless the records are just drastically different, which they're not for Notre Dame and Miami. They're actually the exact same. So I think that's the interesting thing about Miami, and it's kind of funny because we had this similar conversation about Miami last year before they had the meltdown at the end of the season. Um, again, that's why I started with Miami. I think this is an interesting path for them, sitting right there in that bubble spot around 13. How will things play out, and how will things go? Because I think that their spot will affect how teams schedule in the future. Like, if I'm Texas, do I really want to schedule Ohio State next year if I can
Yeah.
beat them, take two bad losses, and then not get rewarded for beating them? You know what I mean? So I hope
But
that we see a path for Miami, but I'm not sure if it's going to happen because, like I said, a lot of things have to happen ahead of them for them to find themselves comfortably in the playoff.
but also does it feel like that the committee kind of ignores weeks 1 through 7? Because if you take that in account, Ohio State beating Texas early and then running through everybody now is like, okay, cool. Texas' first loss should matter more, but then it only seems like it'll matter in these last 2 weeks if they somehow win out and they beat Texas A&M. I do want to transition because we spent a lot of time on the ACC, and
Hmm.
I'm glad actually because I don't get to talk a lot of ACC football, but I do want to transition to quote unquote the conference that just means more. You were working with the Big Ten on at SiriusXM. You have now
Hmm.
transitioned to the dark side of the SEC.
Yeah.
When you look at this rankings and you saw Alabama lost to Oklahoma, but they only go from 4 to 10. Oklahoma does jump and they sit there comfortably at 8. Texas A&M had a scare of the first 30 minutes and then
Yeah.
played flawless the next 30 and they remain at 3. Georgia dominant fashion. They hold their own. But then there's Vanderbilt. When you look at and Ole Miss, I can't even forget them. They were taking their talents to the Citadel and beating those guys up. When you look at around the SEC,
Hmm.
what surprised you with this new ranking system, especially given where Ole Miss is at specifically? Is Ole Miss a team that you should be worried about at their standing, or is it a team that's they went out there in?
I think it's interesting, because like a lot of people talk about Oregon and kind of their lack of schedule. And, you know, I don't know if we hold that same standard when we're talking about SEC teams, particularly, Texas A&M. If we pull up their schedule, let me take a second to do that real quick. I mean, just this past weekend, I think everyone looked at South Carolina as a team that was struggling. Texas A&M was a double-digit favorite within that game, and they fall 28-3, um, and then come back and win that game. I see, again, they won the game, so I'm not, totally bashing them for that. But then we come back and we say, other teams within other conferences, they don't have these signature wins. They don't have these dominant wins. We kind of question Ohio State with their only win being over Tech, like their only dominant win being over Texas. Um, and then there's this caveat: oh, Texas may not be the best, one of the better teams in the SEC. Let's pull up Texas A&M schedule. We got a, a win over Notre Dame, which, you
That
know,
counts. That's a good win.
yeah, it's a good win. I mean, but then we got to factor in who does Notre Dame beat. There's a lot of touch points that I think go back to preseason AP polls and coaches polls, how we look at these teams coming into the year.
I
Um,
look at Texas A&M like this. They
mhm,
have 3 wins against teams that within conference did not have a head coach.
mhm.
Auburn, they had DJ Durkin. Arkansas, they have Bobby Petrino. And then Florida, they have an interim head coach. So all those wins, oh, 4 in LSU, but that was the game that officially would get Brian Kelly fired. So I kind of don't count that one. But it is a very interesting thing, like you said. You look at who have they played compared to, oh, let's say who did Notre Dame play? The SEC scheduling is so weird because I know we talked in the off season, like as the season was about to start, and Greg Sankey hands out these 18-page pamphlets talking about why the SEC is so difficult. I know you remember that.
Yes, yes.
It
All
was
these
like,
analytics and all of these like ESPN and yes, I remember this.
do you think that some of this preseason and I don't know the better term of it, but I'll say preseason propaganda for all conferences. Every conference props themselves up, but
Hmm.
it seems like the SEC does the best job propping themselves up. So even when they lose, they win. Because
Yeah.
again, South Carolina this year goes downhill fast, and
Hmm.
yet we're looking at that as like, oh, that was against a South Carolina team that fought hard for the first 30 minutes, and this Texas A&A team found a way to fix it. Even though
Hmm.
Marcel Reed did not look great that first half, the defense did not look great that first half.
Yeah.
So is this something that we as the media circuit need to do better when it comes to evaluating these teams, especially when it comes to the committee and how you look at them? Again, 60 minutes worth of football, but yet now that will be considered a quality dominant performance win, and that's what makes them good, or at
Hmm.
least I'm not mad at them being at the 3 spot, but it's how we evaluate going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I think there are a lot of college football teams that are good now with the new landscape of college football. Like if we remember last year, like Ohio State was national champions. They went in they welcomed Michigan into their house and Michigan dominated them in that game, controlled the line of scrimmage, was able to get a few turnovers and won that game. And everyone was calling for Ryan Day to get fired. So I think that I'm not trying to take anything away from teams like South Carolina or even LSU or Florida, but I wish when, you know, Big Ten teams or even ACC teams for that matter, when Miami takes losses to SMU or Louisville, we look at it the same way when Texas loses to Florida or Alabama has three turnovers and loses to Oklahoma. A lot of these teams are competitive, but you may not just see it week in and week out. I will give the SEC some credit here because one thing that I do love that they did was not only the non-conference scheduling, but the Power Four game as well outside of the
Yep.
non-conference games. And for me, I think that's very important because when you're evaluating these conferences, there's no way to tell whether how good LSU is compared to another conference, or how good Florida is compared to another conference. Because a lot of people will look at Florida and then look at Iowa and say that Florida is a lot better team. But then we get to postseason play, and last year Big Ten goes 5-1 against the SEC. And this isn't me trying to put on a cape for the Big Ten. I'm more so making a point that we have to get on the field and let these teams play out so we have more data points so we know how good each team is outside of conference play. Because if the SEC has 7 ranked teams and then they all just beat up on each other, it's easy. 7 ranked teams coming into conference play and nobody plays anybody within the non-conference schedule. Nobody of worth. They're all directional schools, and everyone enters conference play 3-0, and everybody beats up on each other. Once we get into conference play within the SEC, it's easy to say, oh, all of these teams are good, so that's why these games are close, and that's why we have upsets. When reality, it's the same in every other conference. Let's play each other. Let's see how good each of these conferences are. Compare each other. Have lines of demarcation within these conferences to see the elite from the rest, and then we can have more data points for the committee.
So you talked about that and the scheduling conflict that has become a hot button issue, right? It's become very much a problem. Joey McGuire was on Dusty and Danny, and he talked about just having of Texas Tech, just like everybody play everybody, everybody shut up. The
Mm-hmm.
committee now knows who can do what against others. The
Yeah.
ACC this year, one of the few conferences that scheduled almost literally had their teams pretty much scheduled at least one game out of conference against a Power Four opponent, whether
Mm-hmm.
it was uh let's say Miami having to play Florida, Texas A&M having to go play dang, who did Texas A&M play? I can't remember this specifically. South Carolina and Virginia Tech playing, like they made that abundantly clear within the
Texas
ACC.
A&M played Notre Dame. I'm sure
They played
a lot of these teams
I
play
will
Notre
consider
Dame.
Notre Dame ACC just for because they pretty much played a Power Four schedule and they played mostly ACC opponents. I know they are independent, but
Mm-hmm.
getting the
Consider
conference
them.
and no one would ever have this argument. Notre Dame,
Mm-hmm.
but that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
Indiana, that this is where I really wanted to go when we talk scheduling. Indiana gets the benefit of the doubt with their scheduling. I remember earlier, before the season kicked off, they canceled a game and then Signetti was just feet held to the fire, like, why'd you guys do this? Why'd you guys do this? He's like, we're just gonna play who we play. Is scheduling going to get more murky? And when I say more murky, I mean a lot more cupcake games left and right to start off
Mm-hmm.
your first 3 weeks. You'll see a lot more easier group of 5 game schedule. When I say easier, I mean a Florida Atlantic, and it's no disrespect to Florida Atlantic, but they're not a Tulane, they're not a Memphis of the group 5, they're not a Boise State. Would you see that happening going forward, or do you think we'll finally get the standard metric of like, hey, everyone play at least somebody within another conference so then we can go across the board to see these strength of schedules?
Yeah, I would say play another two teams in another conference, and they don't even have to be like top teams. Like Texas A&M, put Iowa on your schedule next year. Put Minnesota on your schedule next year. And again, I think first all roads point back to Miami. I would hope that coaches don't do that because the reward for winning um, against the Notre Dame will propel your resume. Versus imagine if Notre Dame didn't win that game and played Old Dominion, let's say,
Play
and
Kent
then
State.
play Kent State and then lose to SMU and Louisville. You understand the talk and what the conversation would be to keep Miami out the playoff because of those two losses. But because of that win versus Notre Dame, people like me are saying, hey, Miami is a solid, they're a good team. They have pieces where they can compete for a national championship. And you mentioned Indiana. I think this is where the Big Ten should take notes because of what the SEC did and what Miami, in that case, and you brought up the ACC did. Um, get all of this automatic qualifier talk. I thought you were going to go there with the Big
No, do you
Ten.
want to? We can,
We can,
because we know there was a 24 college football playoff proposal, 24 team CFP. We can go. Let's table that to when we get to the back end of this, because I do know
yeah,
we're going to get there. We're going to get there.
yeah. But with Indiana in particular, I remember we had a guest, our guy Anthony, and we both love him. He's a dear friend of ours. He came on our College Sports Saturday show, and he was like, "Hey, man, this is Indiana. Like they had a good year this year, or they had a good year one year, but they're not going to do this again. Let's not trip off the fact that they didn't schedule Indiana." And boy, is it it
It
is a
matters.
better, yeah, it is a better Indiana team. So, and Virginia, you see how Virginia's playing this year. Like, man, would have been nice to have that extra touch point for Indiana. Now, I'm not questioning Indiana. I think the win over Oregon is nice. The solid win over Illinois is nice.
Penn State was
Um,
their first quote unquote tested game.
yeah,
Everyone's kind of ran with that rhetoric.
yeah. So, I mean, they played Oregon before that. They played Illinois and Oregon before that. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's just, yeah. So it's just like they have, solid touch points for Indiana, but you don't want to see them set a precedent of, you know, hey, this we're looking at Virginia over here. We had a few people at their spring practice. They look kind of good. Let's take that off our schedules just to make things easier for us when we get in the conference, because then that creates this my conference versus your conference without any touch points or solid data to back up why we, have a harder schedule or tougher opponents this year.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I do want to circle back to the whole committee thing and not the 2014 playoff just yet. Earlier I mentioned what we noticed this year, the committee values the eye test. Last year's committee did a lot more analytics, head to head based statistics and all and that what and whatnot. We went into this season hearing the emphasis on strength of schedule and that metric, but it seems like that kind of has been washed to the side. Should we start getting a set committee process and not just every year cycling a whole new group of committee members? Because everyone values everything differently. And
Mm-hmm.
what we've seen this year, eye test matters. And I'll use Miami for this example. They lose to SMU, that initial rankings. No, they lose to Louisville first. They're sitting at like 18. They're sitting at like 16. Then they go play the following week. It's a dominant win. Then they lose to SMU, and they're like, something's there. Then they put together two dominant wins back to back over Stanford and now NC State, and we've seen this skyrocketed jump for them. Where we saw the same thing for Texas Tech, although that win was dominant against Utah, against BYU, it was like a skyrocketing jump. Should we, as this college football playoff format is ever growing and ever changing and ever evolving, should we get a set of committee members who that is your job, or should we keep it the way it is? Because again, everyone values something differently. I'm not upset at the subjectivity. I think it helps people's cases a little bit, but I do
Yeah.
think not having a set standard of what makes a college football playoff worthy team is my
Mhm.
issue because no one seems to gauge what's the difference between all these two loss teams because that's what we're going
Yeah,
to come down to. It's a
yeah.
bunch of 10-2 teams supposedly, and if the schedule plays the way we all assume, even though it's any given Saturday, there's something that falls in line. So where do you sit across that conversation?
Yeah, I think I love that idea. I think that it's also just so new. You know, like before we got into this season, we were talking about the playoff format for this year. College football is just in such an interesting place where it feels like it's very organized and very thought out and very, you know, it's a lot of money. So you think that it's a lot of thought and planning going into it. But again, we just got this idea of what we're going to do last year. And there were so many holes in last year's ballot where you preferred to be a Penn State and have the fifth or sixth seed than you want to be versus Oregon, who had the one seed last year, which made us change and talk about the new format this year. I think that I do hope, I agree with you 100%. I do hope we can get to that spot, but I think we need to identify who can be those solidified members that serve. I don't know what you think, like 5 years,
Let's get
10
Nick Saban.
years. Yeah.
He can
But
at least give us 5 years.
yeah, hopefully.
5 years
Hopefully.
is just watching him, Mac Brown. Let's think of like we could do this. We could sit here literally and just rattle off a couple ADs and names. Like there's some ADs that's retiring this year.
But
Joe
then
Castiglione.
there's this idea and working with the SEC guys, they hate the idea, and I kind of agree with this, of ADs being on the board because there's an inherent, like, there's a large conflict of interest of ADs being on the board because if I get more schools from the Big 12 within my college football, my conference gets more money, my school gets more money. Therefore, I help my conference out.
That is
So
a great school of thought. I
there's
never
yeah, there's a very big conflict of interest there. So again, this is such a new format, a new way of maneuvering through this. Um, yes, I do. I agree with you, but I think we still have so much to work through because like there's still 14 team models and 16 team models. God forbid 24 team models on the table here. So
well no, nope, you open the door now and I was we're winding down. Don't you open the door now so we can do it. We can
yeah.
have this conversation. You open this door. Uh 2014 playoff model. Yay, nay, yes, hell no, go away. What is your perfect number? I've said it several times. 12 is my perfect number.
Mhm.
How did 24 even become a statement?
Because somehow automatic qualifiers is a good idea to some people. Hate, I don't even think hate is strong enough of a word for it. How much I dislike this model, not to be too blunt or harsh, but yeah, this whole idea of automatic qualifiers, it just seems like a way for big conferences to separate themselves even further from other schools. And it takes the subjectivity of, at the end of the day, that's why we love college football. We can talk about touch points and data points to compare all these teams. It's always going to be subjectivity to it because there's so many teams. There's five different conferences. Not all of them have the same scheduling, geographical surroundings. There's so much that goes into it. So like let's keep the subjectivity in it as much as possible with
Yes.
having uniformity throughout the conferences. But once we start giving out spots to conferences before the season even starts, I think that we're losing. So yes, I don't even know if hate is a strong enough word for how much I
It
dislike to.
takes the meaning out of regular season. Like I know a lot of people when we first got introduced to 12 thought that would take the meaning out of regular season, but it feels like regular season matters so much more with 12. But 24 would just eliminate any doubt. I'd just be like, as long as I'm top five in my conference, I have
Yeah.
a spot.
Yeah.
And
So
I wouldn't even rush.
yeah, so I know before the season started, the conversation was around 16 with AQs and four of those being from the Big Ten and four of those being from the SEC. So 24 with AQs, I can't imagine how many of those AQs would be from the Big Ten and the SEC. I'm hoping that there's some type of uniformity where maybe it's the same number for every conference, and somehow we get to 24. But yeah, once we start to get to four teams within the Big Ten and the SEC, I have trouble thinking this team is a solid contender as a national champion, and I think that's my problem with this AQ format.
So I looked it up. We're looking at 18 auto bids. Top four teams from each power four. Your two highest ranked group of six will receive automatic bids, and then we have six at larges. That is disgusting. I
Yeah,
I am not all for that at all.
yeah.
Uh, we're
I think
we're winding down, and I do want to stay in this conversation. Would you be okay with a 12 team, but both conference teams, like both conference two? Your if they played in the conference championship and they won the conference championship, that autos those two teams in, and then you could do a reseeding structure. That
yeah,
way, your conference championship game still matters. You didn't just play a conference championship game for nothing,
yeah.
and you all you have to worry about is your reseeding.
Yeah. See, yeah, when we talked about that, I think that's still like an AQ format. I'm still a little worried about like a team like Duke sneaking into a conference championship and finding
Fair.
their way into the college football playoff. But for the most part, I'm down for that because I think that like
I think that's
if you make it to the conference champion like last year, SMU and Clemson and Clemson took that big lead and people were saying SMU shouldn't be in. I'm no, I think SMU deserved the right to be in the college football playoff last year.
one loss team up until the conference playoffs. I mean,
Yeah,
conference championship game.
championship. Yeah. And if you watched SMU play, they looked good last year. They put up points, they had playmakers. Um, so you can say, oh, they wouldn't last, but I need to see it on the field because, like we talked about, any given Saturday, who thought that Oklahoma was going to get spanked by Texas that badly earlier this year? So yeah, let's just put them on the field, see what happens, and you know, play it out that way. I don't hate both the conference champion and the runner-up um, getting in, but I think there will be cases. Duke didn't is not going to do it this year, I don't think, but there
No,
would
they
be
are
cases.
now eliminated.
Yeah,
So
there
not
will be
eliminated,
possible.
but they don't control their destiny.
Yeah,
The ACC really comes down to Virginia, Georgia Tech, and SMU is still around creeping behind with one loss.
like if Virginia and Georgia Tech get in, I can definitely favor for both of those teams making it, like finding their way in the college football playoff. I wouldn't be mad at that at all. Now there may be some people from the from the SEC and Big Ten who say like, "Hey, they're stealing our spot," But
Oh gosh, USC deserves to be in after their struggle of trying to make it and then losing when we thought they were the type of team that should be in, and then
mhm.
finally finding their way in what at the top 15 slot.
So now that you brought up that, this is my one question for you today.
Okay.
USC beats Oregon, closely contested game. How many Big Ten teams get in? Ohio State, Indiana.
I think three. I think three, and I think it will come down to USC jumping into that spot. They
Hmm.
won't jump that high and take seven. A lot of people will get pushed up and cycle through,
Hmm.
but I think USC will make a great argument because again, guess who they lost to? Notre Dame.
Hmm.
And there has to be a world where they may not jump Notre Dame, but they are now just that much closer. Where I don't know if Oregon falls completely out, but I'll definitely see them falling to 13. And depending on how the Texas Tech versus BYU/Utah conference championship game is played, that will determine if Oregon can make their way back into that playoff spot.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it. I don't think it's impossible, but that's also the same thought process I have when I look at Texas A&M Texas on the back end of the season on the last two weekends where they have to play each other. And although Texas is out, who says they can't play spoiler to another team? Vanderbilt, they still sit at 14 and they were on bye last week. So the SEC still has a couple teams that have to kind of eat each other up, and that'll also open up that conversation even more. So that is a great question. I definitely gave it some thought, as you see. So it's not like the first time but
Thought about that.
yeah, and even Ole Miss, like I know they play Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl, but that's a game where we've heard a lot of people say if they lose, they're out the playoffs. But we also have heard if they lose, they're somehow still in the playoffs because if that comes at the back end of the season. But
Yeah.
again, the eye test has always shown us that committee has valued recently. What have you done for me? So who knows? Again, this is why I'm not a genius with any of this. Like I always say that I'm not that smart. However, I do have a certain way that I think the committee should be ran. And
Mhm.
although it's not the most perfect system, I know it is somewhat better than what we have of just a different revolving door of people who have different values of what they deem as a deserving team, worthy team, good team, best team, earned team. Like there's so many categories where you could argue for everybody. So that's how I look
Yeah.
at it. I think the biggest question would be group of five. We know now Tulane now is the driver's seat of that group of five,
Mhm.
but James Madison is still somewhere in the background, just waiting for their turn.
Yeah. I mean, this is why we love college football, like this subjectivity and we critique the college football playoff model. It's better this year than it was last year. And hopefully we can continue to improve it, improve it, improve it until we find something that we're all solidified and happy with. And these conference commissioners stop getting greedy and the coaches and the AD stop getting greedy and stop asking for AQs. Hopefully we can find a system that works perfectly and we can just settle into it and continue with the subjectivity with as many touch points as we can.
Yeah. One day we'll get there. But in the meantime, this is what we're left with. And I'm okay with that.
I'm damn happy with it.
Like again, I'm not mad at the rankings. I make that known every time. These
Yeah.
rankings aren't something that make me upset. It's just dang, I wish we knew what were the set standard points. And if we knew that, I think that takes a lot of the guesswork out of who is slotted where and why. Like we all
Yeah.
understand 1 through 3. We're like
Hmm.
undefeated, best defenses in the country. Their winning margin is crazy. You have Ohio State who has the best defense in the country. Indiana, one of the most high scoring offenses. Texas A&M by far the most complete team if they
Yeah.
play a full 60 minutes like they did that last half. So that never bothered me. It's just again, how is this team that lost to Team A that lost to Team B, but Team B is ahead of Team A, but then they have one common opponent that's Team D, and Team D is not even ranked anymore. Where do
Yeah.
they? So it's a lot. But again, this is why we love college football. Hey Mac, I want to thank you for everything. Tell people
Thank
where
you
they
for
can
having me.
tell people where they can find you on social media. Tell them what you're working on and where you be at, man. We all know where you be at, and I'm using this on purpose. Tell them where you at, man.
So yeah, I'm Twitter at ANT_MAJOR. And then yeah, I'm just working at Sirius XM, SEC this morning, Big Ten this morning, as well as locally covering in the Commanders and local Washington DC sports team. So that's what we're working on right now.
All right. You guys go send him a follow, go show him some love. Until next time, I am Darius Brockett. This was another episode of If I Were the Committee, where next week I might have a guest, I might not. If you want to be a guest, let me know. In the comments, how did you see the rankings? Where do you think teams should stack up? Do you think Miami should be ahead of Notre Dame? Do you think the ACC gets multiple bids in? And what is going on that will happen? And what chaos do you think that will become upon us in these final 2 weeks of college football's regular season? Until next time, I am Darius Brockett, like I said, as always, and I will see you guys again. You can follow me on Brockett Media, like, share, and subscribe.